Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Claire Moon, and welcome to another office hour. I am coming to you live from Wisconsin, like usual. It's a very beautiful evening. Oh no, sorry for that technical difficulties. If you're joining me, welcome. Thank you so much. If you're returning, welcome back. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. It should be over to the right-hand side of your screen. And I do have some questions. I have one question. I didn't do a call for questions because I'm going to do some housekeeping and some catch up. And then usually people have some in the chat. So I figure we'll be able to fill an hour. And sometimes we go over, and that's totally okay. Um, I'm trying to think if I have any announcements. I don't think I do. Yeah, it's very equinoxy. It's very the fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm getting used to that. Hello, Tiffany. Hello, KP. Welcome. All right. Well, okay. I think I'm gonna start off not with the pandemic stuff. So like trigger warning for later. Um, I noticed I was watching a Frontline documentary on the pandemic and like the time frame from somewhere in November of 2019 to January of 2020 when it really all got going. And I have a chart or two or three about that I want to follow along with. But I think before we do that, I am going to do a student question. And this is one I've done before, but it's worth repeating because it's a really common thing that comes up and it's a really common question. And the question is, do I do a sign-based aspect or a degree-based aspect? And what if it's both? So if that was word salad, I will show you what I mean visually. Maybe this is a good segue. And this is casual. Feel free to come and go as you please. Um, Actually, here we go. The panty new moon. But this is actually a good example. I figured we could use this anyway for this question. So, what happens when we have an aspect, a connection between two planets that is, say, out of sign, but by degree? So, here's one example of that. So, in this example here, we've got Jupiter in Sagittarius and we have Venus in Capricorn. Jupiter's at about 28 degrees and Venus is at 0 degrees, 45 arc minutes. So they're about, excuse me, so they're about 3 degrees apart, not even 3 degrees apart. And that means that, by a lot of technical standpoints, they're within the orb of a conjunction with each other. But if we look at it by sign, they're definitely in two different signs. And so with that definition of an aspect where an aspect between two planets happens because those two planets are in places that share things in common. So for instance, in this case, we've got Mars and Uranus in an opposition. They share an aspect, they have a connection. And the thing that they share in common is that they are both fixed signs. They share in their quadruplicity or modality. So that's a way that they connect, right? In an aversion, like in this example, we've got two planets that they don't really share anything in common. One's in fire, the other earth, a diurnal versus a nocturnal sign, mutable versus cardinal. So it's like two planets that really are not speaking quite the same language. That being said, they're really close by degree. So then the question becomes, which one do you do? And the answer is both. It's a both and. So, I like to anthropomorphize. I know some people don't like anthropomorphizing planets, but I do it all the time. I talk about them like they're little people. But like looking at these two here, Venus and Jupiter in this example, I imagine two people that are like on opposite sides of a door. And, honestly, if someone's talking on the opposite side of a door, you can still hear them. So, maybe Venus has left the party. They're like off doing whatever they're doing in Capricorn. But they've just stepped outside of the threshold, and it's like Jupiter is already yelling about, in this case, let's just say how great Venus is. And she can still hear them. So, yeah. That's how I treat that. It's a very both and so I would say they have a very weak connection, but they still have a connection. That's how I would treat that. Now let's do a different example. Say, um, right now, for instance, we've got, what would this be? Um, Let me get my setup here. So, like, looking back to the end of September when Venus was moving from Libra into Scorpio. And at that point, at the end of Libra, they were coming into a square with Pluto. And then right after that square, Venus leaves Libra, enters Scorpio, and leaves that degree based. That would actually, hold on. That's a bad example. Let me back up. Let's do, yeah, here. Sorry, I'm gonna back up. Ear it. I'm trying to make the the reversal noises. Okay, so we've got Venus, and let's say they have like one type of aspect by trine, right? Um, let's just pretend like Pluto is in the end of Capricorn because I don't want to go back to there. uh, so like let's say Venus and Pluto at the end of Capricorn. That would put them in what is really like a degree-based trine, but a sign-based square. So I know I kind of jarbled that, but we can see when Venus is at this end of Virgo, into Libra. By degree, they're about 120 degrees away from Pluto. And that 120 degree trine aspect, it's usually more soft, it's more pliable, it's more agreeable, it's easier, quote unquote, for lack of better terms. But again, let's pretend like Pluto is here in Capricorn. God, that's a bad glyph. Ignore that. My circle goes up there. That would then be a square by sign. So they're in a sign-based square. Then that's a harder aspect. And so which one would you do? You know, if they're by degree, they're a trine, but by sign, it's a square, then what you're going to want to do is both. And so they're going to have some tension, but maybe not as much as we would expect. Maybe it's a slightly softer square. Or, you know, if it's like a degree based square, but a sign-based sextile, then that's going to be a softer type of square as well. So there's ways of blending the aspects a little bit when you get into those situations that you don't have to choose. So hopefully I didn't off to a good start. Hopefully I didn't make that clear as mud. But yeah, the answer is both and when it comes to degree based versus sign based, it's not a versus, it's a both and. Okay, so let me see if I can. Yeah, what's the panty new moon? It's the pandemic. It's the pandemic new moon. Sorry. I didn't want to write the whole word, but I can. Just to make it clear, because I realize people aren't going to be all coming in at the same time. Pandemic. Okay, how's that? There we go. Okay, so that's a great segue. Let's go to there. I'm going to be calling upon the decans, which is a subdivision of the zodiac. It's chopping up the signs into these 3 10-degree chunks. So if we consider, let us look back. So I'm going to give a little chronology first on the timeline of kind of when the pandemic really started to occur at the end of 2019, before most of us knew about it. And again, trigger warning if you're like, wow, don't feel like talking about this tonight, that's totally reasonable. You can come back in 10, 15 minutes. I'll be done with it. And then, or fast forward, there will be timestamps after I get done with this. But if you want to stick around, I think it's absolutely fascinating. So this comes from a Frontline documentary. Uh, Dang it, I forgot to link it. I'll link it below. Um, it's from 2022, I believe, or 2021, but it's about the timeline and all of the information that did or did not come out when the pandemic was actually brewing. So thinking back to November, mid-November of 2019, it was estimated by Northeastern University that there were around 0 cases. By end of November into December, there starts to be estimated that there are cases by mid-December, 70 to 200. And then by end of December of 2019, an estimated 2,300 to 4,000. So 2,300 estimated 4,000 COVID cases. And then by January 6th, 2020, an estimated 6 to 10,000 cases estimated. And so estimated is different than reported. So we'll be clear there. And P.S., there's no judgment. I'm not going to make political comments or judgment comments on ethics or anything medical. This is just being very crass, cut and dry. So if you want soupiness, it's not going to be with this. Um, so that's like the timeline of the progression of the spread of this condition, really from mid-November being kind of nothing to the end of December into January being a really big problem. So let's look then. Oh, this is tropically. So I'm using the tropical zodiac. I am going to do sidereal because I was curious. I was like, well, how does this look if we use the sidereal zodiac? Um, but if we're using the tropical zodiac, what really, this was the thing that struck me. And this is where we call upon the decans. And this 10-degree chunk really has to do with the rapid spread of something. And you can say the spread of enthusiasm, the spread of information, or the spread of a disease. And so from Austin Kopic's 36 Decans workshop, I'll just make some, or I'll read off some notes here. Rapid movement and transitions, excitement. He mentions the Eight of Wands as far as a tarot correspondence, going fast, movement, a vision, and has an infectious nature, going viral in some ways, happening all at once, or it doesn't happen at all. It's not simply additive, it's multiplicative. It happens swiftly or not at all. Um, so that is the nature of that decan. And that is the nature of a plague that spreads really rapidly, really quickly. So the speed at which it is spreading. If we look at this sidereally, which I will, let me. You can use a couple. There's the Fagan Allen and then the Lahiri. I'm just picking the Fagan Allen because it works. Is there a difference? I don't think so. Be a little bit, yeah, just a tiny bit. But here on that same timeline, we get it at the beginning of Scorpio. And now Scorpio has a different set of significations in terms of thinking about it from like the 36 decans standpoint. But it's interesting too, because if I think to like Hephaestio and what they transmitted about the Egyptian practice of astrology, and then thinking about what the first decan of Scorpio was to ancient Egyptians from the nous of the decades. And where did that go? Okay, so it says for the first decan of Scorpio, um, there's a quote here: he who can no longer speak, he who can no longer dot dot dot, and then we lose whatever the text or the phrase was. And P.S. I get this Egyptian decan stuff. There's a few people who are doing really good work on it. Demetra George, for one, Egyptian astrology. Cameron Cassidy, who is the person who I just learned some of this Hephaestio Nous of the Decade stuff from. And then also, oh gosh, J M Hamadi. They're also doing really good work on Egyptian astrology. But if we look at that first decan of Scorpio, it talks about the deity Set or Seth, the god of chaos, disorder, challenges, perpetual peace, or challenges to perpetual peace. That's what it is. Yeah. Disorder, challenges to perpetual peace, storms, war, conflicts. Um, and then again, he who can no longer speak, he who can no longer. And it's really interesting. And I know I'm scrying right now. I'm riffing, like I'm pulling this out of nowhere. But it is really interesting that, and this is something that, you know, I think it's been a while now, so we're not really talking about this anymore, but the the slowness of information that happened in the early days of the pandemic, the lack of transparency on a lot of fronts. Um, and that is very much, there was a lot of not speaking happening. There was a lot of trying to control the outcome at this point in time, November into December. And then if we watch where this goes, we can see then, okay, there's a full moon. And then the next new moon sidereally is in that same place. It's just a month later. We get this first decan of Sagittarius now on December 25th. And by December 25th, 26th, that's when most of the information was really starting to get out. Now people are starting to know. And so this actually not only fits with the spread of disease and virality and that nature, but this also then, by the time we get to the end of December, this also fits when we use the sidereal zodiac. This also fits quite a bit with the dissemination of information and the dissemination of understanding and the genetic code of the virus and all that stuff. So I thought it was pretty interesting that we had, you know, just a lot of Scorpio activity leading up to this first decan new moon. No matter if we cut it tropically or sidereally, this is really occurring over end of November into end of December of 2019. It all kind of paints a similar picture of trying to control outcomes, lack of transparency, trying to be strategic about stuff, no matter what part of that whole thing you were on. And then that, again, just quick, speedy virality. So pretty mind-blowing, fits very well. And then that was what was going on in the rest of the sky when we had what was the indicator of, you know, pestilence, plague. And then also, you know, anytime you get Pluto and Saturn together, before we had Saturn, or sorry, before we had Pluto being kind of the control freak of the planets, it was usually Saturn. And so two planets together that are also trying to, you know, do things together that might hold control over a situation or try to maintain control over a situation that really began with these notes of discord, conflict, basically, disorder. So, okay, let me see if there are any other little notes about that that I'm missing. But I think that was, oh, yeah. And then, okay, last thing, carrying it forward. So let's go back into tropical mode. Uh, so if we've got end of November, new moon, first decan of Sag, and then we go along to December 11th, December 10th, December 11th, that was, yeah, there wasn't a lot of information coming out at that point still. So I'm not seeing anything super correlated there. It was more at the end of December. But then there was an account from a healthcare worker that was from the beginning of January. And this was really interesting. because by January, what was it? I'm going to read what the quote was from this person who was anonymized from the Frontline documentary. But the healthcare worker said that they began to suspect human-to-human transmission around the 5th or 7th of January because because the respiratory department was becoming full around the 9th and 10th of January. Um, or sorry, let me restate that. They began to suspect human-to-human transition around the 5th or 7th of January. And then around the 9th or 10th of January, the respiratory department was becoming full. So that was January of 2009. And that's when, as a healthcare worker, that person had really understood that this was going to be a bigger deal. And where do we see the moon? Around the 9th or 10th, when they were seeing the respiratory department fill up. We had a full moon. And they always say, emergency department fills up when the moon is full. Now we see a different department filling up when the moon is full, and kind of peak, a culmination of something that had been brewing, for longer than a couple weeks. But all to say, just those cycles of the moon and following that, I was just really blown away with how well it fit the stories of several different people from different parts of the story. So hopefully that wasn't too much of a bummeroni, but I think that it's good to look at those things as a good example, and I wanted to share it. So I'll be taking any questions. Kat Aaron Davis, the first decan of Sagittarius, that is the one that has to do with speed and rapid spread of things. So this little chunk here. And then when I was reading more like from the Egyptian astrological tradition, the first decan of Scorpio having to do with disorder, chaos, conflict, war, things of that nature. So those were the two decans and some of the symbolism with those. Yeah, thank you for that. All right. So let's see. What else did okay, so I wanted also to riff on Jupiter. So this is kind of like, now I'm going to be ooey gooey. Now I'm going to be soupy. Get rid of that complicated wheel because it hurts my eyeballs. I was doing a Jupiter practice kind of unintentionally. I was doing a gratitude practice, and I know it's kind of, I'm also very Saturnian. So when I started doing a gratitude practice, I was like, this is the cheesiest shit on the planet. It felt so unnatural to me. And so I know plenty of other fellow, kind of sometimes cynical, pessimistic folks that, doing a gratitude ritual can feel kind of, or a gratitude practice can feel kind of inauthentic. Um, Especially when there's a lot of, difficulty in the world, and like, let's say just personally, maybe you're having a really, really hard time doing a gratitude exercise. Like, come on, what do I got to be grateful for, right? And that's, I guess one more nuance with gratitude and gratitude practices is, yes, gratitude is not the same as being passive. It's not the same as letting go or setting down your agency. Having gratitude for a situation also doesn't mean accepting like a status quo. I know, I think it's really good to point that out because there can be a lot of difficulties. And I'm not saying we need to be grateful and then be passive and then not make changes to our lives. And I think about this, what comes to mind is when I used to be like driving to this job I hated, and I would be like, well, I guess I'm very grateful to have a paycheck, and like I'm very grateful to have this job, and I'd like, try to hype myself up and like get myself through the day with that. Um, that kind of that can be a slippery slope to doing nothing sometimes, just surviving even further. But I think it also is pretty necessary. to get through. So anyway, Jupiter nuance. But I wanted to say that not as like some flippant white lady being like telling you to be grateful for stuff. Um, but when we're invoking Jupiter. That's who we are invoking. Jupiter is abundance. They are exalted in Cancer, which is a very verdant, growthy sign. They are rulers of Pisces and Sagittarius, very expansive, open types of places, and very knowledge oriented. Jupiter, Pisces, and Sag. And what I noticed, so I was doing this gratitude exercise, and what it was actually mindful eating stuff. And as you are getting ready to eat, as you are eating, thinking about all of the things that are on your plate and how they got there, and thanking all of the people, places, things, animals that have resulted in your plate of food in front of you. And it's a really beautiful exercise in terms of, fostering a sense of like interconnectedness, fostering an appreciation for what you're eating in that moment. But it also, what I was realizing, and this was like the fun, cute thing I wanted to share, is as I was doing this gratitude thing, I was starting to think like about all of the people involved in the food. And it started to actually lead me to questions about like, hey, where does this come from? And who is picking this? And are they getting compensated? And, it started to just really unfurl and unfold and unwind into this like whole, honestly, like expansive knowledge kind of practice, or expanding my knowledge type of practice. And understanding, and really like reminding myself and thinking, oh yeah, my understanding is confirmed or validated. Yeah, this is how this gets to my plate. And that's actually a really big deal. So appreciation, that also feels like a Jupiter thing. So I don't know, like it really ended up being really multifaceted. I wanted to talk about it because it was funny how like gratitude led to kind of a confirmation of understanding, or inspiring me to learn more, or do better, or expand myself. And it just, yeah, it was this whole upward spiral thing. It was very cute, very Jupiter. Um, very mind proliferative. Blah, 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 blah. Not very mindful, honestly, but I was happy where it went, in terms of meta and love and connectedness. Um, let's see what people are saying. Ann Stevens has a really great question. They say that there's going to be a lunar occultation of Saturn this weekend. What's the interpretation of sky aspects like this? All right, let's look. I bet it's going to be when the moon is right with Saturn. Must be right. I'm assuming this is what this is. So if I'm wrong, I apologize. Um, but I suppose what that means is that when you look in the sky, the moon is going to move across where Saturn is, and I won't be able to see Saturn while the moon is in front of it. It is a conjunction, astrologically speaking, and it's really blending the significations of these planets very directly. Um, we can, if you want to think about it hermetically, thinking about the moon being this connecting celestial body that brings down the effluences of the other planets from the other spheres down to us, acting as kind of like this helpful connecting agent. And so the moon is really connecting us with Saturn in this moment, on this day. And so we might be really, really experiencing Saturn very fully, vividly, loudly around this day, on the 14th of October, at least in Central Time Zone. So whenever the moon is conjunct Saturn, that's going to be the case. And at some points during the year, we can see it. If the sun has set, which the sun will set and then they'll rise. So yeah, we should be able to see them up there. And I'm always really surprised too how close Saturn and the moon can be. And the moon can be pretty bright, and I can still see Saturn next to it. Like I'm always very impressed with that. I don't understand enough about astronomy to know how that's possible. Because Saturn is just so dim usually, and the moon can be so bright. So, I would even think the few hours before and after that, get out your binoculars or just use your eyes, and you should be able to see them together in the sky. So their significations are also going to be blended together. Uh, oh, same declination. Yeah. So, okay. Thank you. Astrologers since the ancient times, so like I'm talking about the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, they cared about that. They really cared about declination. So declination is, how do I explain this? So if you're looking at the ecliptic, the path of all the planets in the sky, um, they're usually going along a certain path that has a certain height, depending on your latitude or your position on the globe and the time of year. And then certain planets can actually kind of waver up and down in height, in declination or latitude, 9 degrees above, 9 degrees below. And it's this kind of 18-degree swath where planets are, yeah, up and down. And so what'll happen sometimes is a planet, they'll be moving and they'll be the same in terms of longitude, but they'll be at different latitudes. So they're not blocking each other out. Anne is bringing up a situation where actually we get lucky. And not only are they at the same place in longitude, but also latitude. And so it's just, I think, an extra distilled, strong, potent um, conjunction of Moon and Saturn. So, let's talk about what Saturn is. And I'm not sure what your knowledge base is, but just in case anyone else wants to know. So, a few things Saturn can be, they can be realism. So, having a really disillusioned, realistic view of things, not necessarily pessimism, which is just saying, oh, it's not going to work out. So, I guess I'll just, say whatever. Um, Not like nihilism, although at extremes it can start to dip into that. So if you notice yourself feeling hopeless or really down or anything like that, that's a sign that we can be getting a little bit too much Saturn. But Saturn can be really helpful in terms of being realistic, showing us what's really there so that we can actually deal with it. So if you're looking for clarity on something, I'm kind of curious then on 13th, especially the 14th, then what kind of clarity we're going to be getting around, I would especially assume Pisces house topics in our life. So what else about Saturn? I mean, they can be the critical voice. Vedius Valens said in Anthology that they are hypercritical and self-deprecating. So, like, if you're feeling hypercritical or self-deprecating, that could be a sign of Saturn. And it's also healthy boundaries, drawing boundaries. It's like, this is the limit. This is where this stops. And maybe that's coming into view. Discipline. Perhaps you're feeling extra disciplined on the 14th. Um, yeah, and potentially, more for the night babies. If you're born at night, Saturn can be more extreme versions of these things. So, constructively, we can have healthy boundaries. We can say no to things. We can be realistic. And that's how I would handle the 14th. That is such a cool thing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's such a good reminder for me because, like, I totally forget to look at declination, and I really need to not forget to look at it. I've been working on a chart calculations class that I've been procrastinating on for like a year and a half. Finally doing it. It's Demetra George's chart calculations class on the Astrology University. And she was just talking about declination. Like she was like, yes, people have always cared about it. We should care about it. So yes, we should care about it. Uh, okay, so Yeah, Kat, totally. Yeah, nothing wrong with appreciating and noticing things that are going well. Because the brain doesn't do that on its own, I don't think. It usually brains are pretty wired to try to find threats. So they sure do like to find those threats. So if we can find the good things, that's usually helpful. Um, Will, good question. So how do you make sense of a stellium in a house? What rules are there to follow in interpretation? Yeah. So this is where it's really important to have a good grasp of dignity and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the first step, is to make sure you're really solid on the dignity scheme, including domicile, exaltation, triplicity, bound, and decan lord, and all of that stuff. Um, it's really helpful to know the subdivisions of the zodiac. So, if you've got like, do I have Garth Brooks, our dear Aquarius stellium? Oh yeah, here we go. Garth Brooks is so funny. He's such a strange duck. Okay. Also, I feel like actually I should stop using his chart. I feel like I just heard that we found out that he's an inappropriate weirdo like so many other celebrities. So stay tuned, but we'll use him today. Okay. Let's see. So, look at the planet that has the most dignity. Like that's going to be one thing. Which planets are visible? So this is where, okay, if the sun is involved, things can get really interesting, because then you want to look at like which planets are actually visible next to the sun, if they're all in the same sign. Are they outside of that 15-degree thing? Um, are they in their own sign? Like here in this example, Saturn, they're in their own sign. They are within 15 degrees of the sun. So technically they're not visible. So then I'm gonna, say their loudness or something slightly hidden, maybe, but they have their chariot, their little sunbrella that they hold that protects them from the sun. So Saturn's doing pretty good. Mars is in Peregrine. They aren't doing especially great. They're under the beams of the sun, so is Mercury, but Mercury now, they're in their own decan, so they've got like at least one space point. Yeah, so just kind of keep going along like that. And then that can kind of tell you which planets might have the loudest voice at the table. Like imagine them all in the same room. They're all sitting at a table. Who's going to be the loudest at that table? And maybe it's like, in Saturn's case, they're in Saturn's house. And so if anyone wants Dr. Pepper or anything, they have to ask him first. So yeah, that's a way of picking apart things. Trying to think of resources to get into this stuff too, because like I know Kira Ryberg just released a bounds guidebook that I haven't gotten yet, but all her stuff is usually really good. So there's a bound book from Kira Ryberg that might help you a little bit. Um, Even like Vedius Valen's anthology, he's got some, there's a lot of like ancient sources that have descriptions of the bounds. Like they go through like all of the bounds. What was it? Let me look really quick. Levant Laszlo just released something from the Horror Project. Yeah, Critidemus on the names and indications of the bounds just came out from the Horror Project. So yeah, there's a lot of in the ancient texts. I am not at all like well versed in which ones. I just know like two off the top of my head. Uh, that's another way to really get into that. Let me think. What else about stelliums? Uh, as far as like who's earlier or later in degree, I personally don't care. I don't think like a planet that's earlier or later in the sign is like stronger or less strong. And then finally, in this example, um, the midheaven is an angle, and now Venus is really close to that. And so Venus is going to be lifted up, stronger, louder, because she's next to the midheaven. And then I guess final thing is within that stellium of planets, I kind of like outer planets. I mean, like, right now, there's a lot of people who have Neptune and Uranus both together in Capricorn. If you've got like Neptune, Uranus, and like two other planets in here, um, I don't know. I don't, a lot of people have those outer planets in a place. So I'm not so like, I'm not reading them. But I will say, like, I'm going to prioritize the outer planets more on a stellium if they are conjunct a visible planet within 3 degrees. So if you got a visible planet that's conjunct an outer planet within 3 degrees, that outer planet to me, then they're going to be even louder because they're getting really blended in with the visible planet in a really special way. Um, so yeah, there's a ton of things to consider that will start to paint a picture, I think, over time that you're looking at it. How are these planets interacting? And let's say you've got like two that are conjunct on this side of the sign and two other planets that are like, 25 degrees away and conjunct on the other side. I mean, yeah, that's like two little clicks in the same room, but in opposite corners. Like, I think that you can look at it that way. Um, so yeah, think of them like they're little people. But yeah, that's what I have for that. Great question. Most dignity, so domicile and exaltation have the most depending on who you ask, like by the time we get to the medieval Persian tradition, the exaltation was stronger. And even some of the Hellenistic authors seem to imply that like Hellenist or that exaltation was a little stronger. Um, Words like fortification for exalted planets, they're in these fortified places that are like extra strong. We talk about exalted planets being the guest of honor, but they're also not responsible for anything. And I also wonder, how much control of the resources they actually have personally, um, if we keep rolling with that logic. But in any event, just for me, I tie them kind of domicile, exaltation, and then all the other ones. Decan is like the least. Um, earlier in the tradition, like the way that decans were used is also just way different than how they were used by the time we get to like 1,000 years later. So, I mean, decan lords, I don't give them a ton of weight, but they're part of it. So yeah, who has the strongest voice at the table? That's one way to kind of piece all that apart and prioritize it. Great questions, folks. Uh, so I guess I have like, oh, I did have one kind of point that ties into that. So on this dignity kind of example, so a planet in their own sign, we get like the guest host metaphor where a planet in their own sign is like the host. It's their home. They have a say about who comes and goes and how they treat those people. Um, so, there's a lot of like power and responsibility maybe that could be implied from being a host or having a home. Um, so that all exists. But then like another thing to think about is agency. So like when you're in your own home, you also have the ability of self-governance usually, where it's like if it's your things and your stuff and you have the ability to do with those things as you please, that is like this sense of agency that that planet has to kind of self-govern, do its own thing. Most people see that as a favorable thing. So I just want to like give those types of metaphors and ways of thinking about dignity. I don't know, maybe it helps. Uh, so I want to talk about the moon and also another Jupiter Saturn-y thing. But yeah, last call. Last call, because as soon as I'm done with this, I have to finish the third season of Bridgerton, which I am so late to watching. Oh my God. I'm so late. It was so hard listening to everyone watching it like several months ago, and I just didn't have time. So let's get Garth Brooks out of here. Okay. Yeah, lots of hearts for Garth Brooks leaving the building. I have not talked about the double moon, but I could. And actually, I'm going to refer to Dr. Ali Alomi because they, if you're on their Patreon, which I highly recommend, they were recently talking about the comet and about the second moon. So I'm going to punt and like defer to them. That being said, the second moon, we can't see it with our naked eye. So as far as like trying to be more of like a thinking what, a sky watcher might have made of such a thing, well, they couldn't have seen it. So I guess I can just that's kind of a cop out, but I could just leave it there. Um, but like, these kinds of uh extracurricular objects in the sky and comets and meteors, they were important. They're definitely important to look at. So these are worth discussing. All I know, like the deets on the ground, is that it's like as big as like as long as three giraffes and like as wide as two buses or something. That's how big it is. And yeah, I guess it's just staying for a short time. Yeah. Guess I don't have much to say about it. But yeah, definitely worth watching stuff like that. And then I guess on that note, so looking at the moon, because I saw, and not to like tell someone that they're wrong or anything, but I was seeing some astrology discussions on Threads, which was my first mistake. And and people were talking about how to interpret the moon. And this was like a really long time ago, so it's nothing that's been recently said on social media. And they were just like very like talking about like, oh, wherever the moon is, that's where you find comfort. And I was like, I wish. I wish, she says, with the moon in her second house. I wish I was finding comfort in Scrooge McDuck, like, or any money, like, all right. Yeah, don't we all? I guess that's kind of a water is wet statement. So all to say, it's not that simple. If you look at a moon in a natal chart, just because that's where the moon is, even if you look there for comfort, that doesn't mean you're going to find it. And to answer that question, it depends on a lot of other things, like dignity being one, but then also like things like, who's ruling that moon and can they see them and can they support them, provide guidance or resourcing? And, that moon, do they like being where they are? Does the moon like being in Capricorn? Not especially. Does it like being in an earth sign, in a nocturnal sign? Yes, they do. So it's not all for naught. Um, that being said, like I'm not going to tell someone who's like this theoretical uh Taurus rising with the moon in Capricorn in the ninth. I'm not going to say, hey, you might be really comfortable in a foreign country. Probably not. Maybe if you have a friend there, or maybe if you had some kind of group connection, or yeah, we could riff on that, but it's not going to be that simple. So I just want to state that very plainly. Um, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that. I guess I could riff on it more, but I don't really think I need to. Thank you, Kat. Yeah. See, now I'm not following the Katavada Sutta very well, talking about someone who's not in the room, but yeah. Yeah, these things. It's hard to know with Saturn and Neptune, what's real, what's not real. Okay, so last thing that I want to discuss is another Jupiter Saturn type thing. Um, thinking about, I was talking about Jupiter and gratitude, expansion, understanding, learning. Now, I guess I should point out the nuance that comes up a lot when I talk about Jupiter in session with people. Learning stuff is not always fun. Learning things is not always happy. Um, learning, yeah, it depends on what you're learning or understanding. Sometimes it's a very difficult journey to have to be faced with truth sometimes. So, yeah, Jupiter stuff doesn't always feel good. Might be favorable in the long run, but as far as like like qualitatively feeling good, nah, that's a different question. Um, but overall, like I like to also think about Jupiter like faith and um, it's goodwill, it is optimism and kind of putting that into the future in this faith way. Now, any extreme of anything is probably going to be challenging or problematic in some way. So, even with something like Jupiter, extreme faith, even like absolutist type of faith, that actually can get us in trouble sometimes when we have, just unfounded faith in, and a lot of cultures really, um, they applaud that, they encourage that because what it detracts from is Saturn. So doing increasing Jupiter, I feel like it's almost like this inverse relationship with Saturn where then there's no doubt. So it's like, okay, faith, Jupiter, Saturn, doubt. So two ends of a spectrum. The more we're up on faith, we're kind of having less doubt, right? Now there is that whole discussion about the strongest faith having been tested by doubt still existing. I still have faith. I have doubted it. I have questioned it, and I am still choosing to believe. I am still choosing to have faith. It's when another way you can blend them together really nicely is Saturn gets your evidence. We see the evidence, and that just supports our belief in the thing, or it supports our faith in the thing because now we actually have evidence as well. And so there are ways that find this really nice kind of middle ground. There are ways where we see like ends of a spectrum, right? So I don't know. I just think it's interesting to consider that. And then on the other end of, we got, faith that's completely unfounded. We can also have doubt that is completely unfounded. And we can have doubts, just can chronically just questioning things and, things never being good enough and the goalposts constantly changing. It gets really hard to have faith, right? It gets really hard to do any kind of positivity if there's just this constant naysaying or doubt. So, good things to be aware of. I like to throw it out there into the universe. You can, if that becomes helpful or useful in a session for you or with your own chart, looking at Jupiter and Saturn and how those areas might be coming up. And two, if you have a very strong Jupiter, then maybe you're dealing with very strong faith or optimism or hope. If you have a very strong Saturn, maybe you're dealing with extremely strong doubt, judgment, skepticism. Are there ways that can marry really well and skillfully in the chart and then be just like two really great voices to have at a table? Um, I think that inspires me toward a final topic that's more of like a philosophical corner, like psychobabbly kind of thing. But before I do that, let me check on the chat. All right. No, nothing going on. So, okay, last thing. Um, this is like I've been watching a lot of cult documentaries. Oh boy, where is this going? And there's so much like psychology and like psychological language that gets used and thrown around in general, but then especially like in some of these cult type situations. And then there's so maybe there's like kind of two big distinctions is the use of psychological language online and just everywhere. It's just ubiquitous, which I think is great in a lot of ways because, I think a lot of us can say that psychoeducation very much helped us, like learning about certain psychological things like attachment systems, like a lot of people have been helped with that information. Um, and then a whole separate bucket again of misuse of psychological things that end up in like cults. So, uh, I want to talk about that because then I see that language, all of like I'm in like this third bucket of like spiritual industry kind of we're doing divination, we're talking about well-being. I call it a helping industry, I guess, if anything else. it's metaphysics, I'm hearing a lot of similar language. We're all kind of in this stew together, right? And one word that I hear come up a lot is integrating and integration. And actually, another place that integrating and integration comes up is with psychedelic assisted therapy. Because the idea is you have that experience and then you work with someone who's been trained to help you to take what you can from that experience, make sense of it, and integrate it essentially, instead of just like having the experience, not reflecting on it, not making any sense of it, or coming to any kind of drawing any conclusions or meaning from it, and just kind of moving on with your life. Um, then there's no integration. So it has its like these words mean things, integrating a thing. What the heck? Did I even do like the basic B kind of like look up the definition? Integration. Uh, a process of integration, yeah. Uh, combination, incorporation, unification, consolidation, amalgamation. So bringing together of things. This feels like a Jupiter word. This definitely feels like a Jupiter word. So, okay, Jupiter's in Gemini right now. So that's a lot of different things to try to integrate, right? God, there's just like so much stuff online right now. But I want to, I guess, talk about this word integration and integrate, because it's starting, I think, to become a thing where it's like just another thing to achieve, like being whole or healing or being awakened or enlightened or whatever, having an awakening, or, like it's all like it's starting to sound like a weird meritocracy in some places, in some ways. Um, and I guess, let's be more Jupiter about it and not like shame these unintegrated parts, because I feel like there's like things about the chart where people ask me, and this comes up like frequently enough that I'm talking about it here. Um, that like people are concerned about it. Like if there's any dissonance in the life, if there's any internal dissonance, internal discord, then there's like something that's been there's something that needs to be done. There's something unwhole or incomplete or unintegrated, and it becomes like this thing to fix. And I often find that what I hear in people is just two different parts of themselves, that's just those voices at the table. It's that same metaphor of voices at the table, because I have certain parts of me that want to just blab and say everything all the time and have no like no strategy or slowness about it. And then there's parts of me that know that that's not beneficial to me or anyone. And those parts of me are constantly in conflict. It's a square. It's in my chart, it's a square. And there is tension inside of me between my Jupiter and my Sun Mercury. They want to do very, very different things, but I need both of them. They're so valuable, both of them, to have at the table. I don't feel like I need to shut Jupiter up, and I don't feel like I need to shut Sun Mercury up, but I need to listen to them at the both in the right amount at the right times for the right situations. And they both come in handy in different contexts. Sometimes I need to go fully into Jupiter Aries mode. Sometimes I need to go fully into my Sun Mercury Capricorn in the 12th house mode. And a lot of times I'm trying to balance in between, and the tension comes out in like sweating. And like, this being a fun thing for me. But like, yeah, it's like it's not leisurely. It's a square. So, I don't know. There's nothing there to like fix, I don't feel like, but I think a lot of people come into my office and they have a similar kind of thing in their chart where it's like there's an opposition or a square or these very different parts. Like, especially if you've got, say, if you are someone with a lot of squares or oppositions, like, this Mars in Cancer, this Moon in Capricorn, they're going to have very different ways of going about things. And that's probably never going to change for that person. And it's like they're both in here. It's like, how could they, if you're aware of it, if you understand, if you see what's going on in your life, if you're noticing these things, like to where you can name them and label them and talk to me about how you feel about them, um, I mean, that's huge. So it's not subconscious, it's not unaware, it's not there. Uh, you're not noticing it. So I'm like, yeah, what's there to do? I don't think there's anything to integrate. I don't think there's anything to fix. I think at this point, it's less about like, I'm really trying, and I think a lot of people are trying to get away from this language of, like becoming like whole or becoming healed or, like having that become like mm, such a thing that everyone's always so focused on. And then coming maybe instead into more radical acceptance. And that doesn't mean lack of accountability. That doesn't mean, oh, I'm radically me and so I don't care about, how anything goes down. Um, but yeah, less about like, oh, how do I make this thing work in my life and stop feeling bad? How do I make this thing different? How do I make this thing feel not bad? Um, I think sometimes the answer is not to make it not feel bad. Like there's a lot of resisting in that, but getting comfortable with the discomfort of it and getting used to it. And, then also changing circumstances, changing the context of your life to take the pressure off if that is just a really sharp type of point for you. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think it has to be like this constant thing to fix. Okay. I think I've said my piece. There's so much like there's a lot of language out there that I think these words get so loaded and full of meaning for a lot of people that I don't know, like we got to almost like pull back from the words a little bit and see what they're doing. Okay, thanks everyone. Let me make sure there's no final things. I don't know much about quintiles. That's more of like a modern astrology thing. I heard David Bowie has a lot of them. Um, yeah, I don't know much about them. Yeah, apologies on that. Yeah, Jupiter did totally gestation. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, well, and I have not learned internal family systems, but it's funny because I know enough to know that they use the word parts. That's like one of their things. And it's funny how like, and since then I've heard many people who do astrology saying how well internal family systems, how well that model and astrology work together because the kind of conceptualization around what makes up a self, what makes up a person. There's a lot of similar kind of Venn diagram overlapping language, I think. Um, yeah, it jives. Yeah, Jupiter and Gemini in detriment. It's hard for Jupiter to bring things together in a place where it's like, well, what about that? And what about this? And what about this? And yeah, it's really, really difficult. And Jupiter usually is in charge of fire and water. We're either acting on it, uh, we're taking the steps to make it make sense. Uh, in air, it's just like it feels like being in one of those machines where they've got money kind of in a tornado and you're trying to like grab the money. It's like Jupiter's like trying to just like grab at whatever it needs to make it make sense. And it's just, yeah, it's not a great environment for them. So I am very, very excited if we can all just get our buns to like next June. That would be great. Um, all right, friends. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for hanging out and being here. I appreciate it so much. And like great contributions and great questions. I think we knocked it out of the park. So I'm gonna see everyone again. I think I did schedule it. My next, my next forecast. I'm only doing one a month now, and I'm gonna do it on Thursday, November 24th at 3 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That'll be a Thursday afternoon. So that'll be for all of November. I'll have another one of these next month. It's the second Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Central Time. And in the meantime, you can send me a DM on Instagram if you have any questions ever. I'm really slow with that. Like, give me 7 to 10 days. Way quicker if you email aligninglight astro gmail.com. Usually 3 days max, 4 days sometimes. Um, what else? I have a discount code right now, Equinox. I think that's like 10% off everything, anything. And sign up for the newsletter. Hit like, hit subscribe. If you want to keep up with this stuff, get on the newsletter. It's also on my website, www.aligninglightaster.com. And I send out one a month. I do not like flood you with emails. And that is where I do my monthly discounts. Oh, and totally random thing. So I always wear these earrings, and I know people comment on them from time to time. And I actually wanted to share the person because I was looking at their website, and I'll put it in the show notes, and I'll put it in the comment section. But super great. It's called Brambles Woodwork, and they are in the Eastern time zone, and I think they're okay. They say that their shop is opening again in 2 days. So it's one of these shops where like they pop up and open their doors, and then everything sells out in like 5 minutes. So you have to be there like at the ready with the button. It's pretty fast. And I think they open like once a month. So the next one is I just couldn't believe that it's in 2 days. And I was like, oh, well, then I'll share it because it's going to be really soon. And that's at 12 p.m. EDT, Eastern time, noon, in 2 days. And then again, that's Brambles Woodwork. If you like these earrings, you want some. Okay. And then also last thing, the world's on fire. Everything's flooding. The government still in my country keeps doing stupid things and giving weapons to people. Um, just a call out, a thank you, first of all, to everyone who's sharing with mutual aid, everyone who's donating to whatever causes you're donating to, the people who are doing the inner work to quell their own reactivity, the people who are doing the work to quell their own seeds of hate and frustration that can lead to all kinds of bigger hate things later. All the people are trying to do all that work. Thank you. That is what we need to be doing. So I just want to say that to like, do the whole rouse, encourage, inspire. Uh, if you are feeling like, oh, I should be doing more, or I wish I was doing more, sometimes you do need to rest. Sometimes it is not the best time for you to be at the front of the activism herd, and then know that the job for you to do is to take care of yourself so that you can move on to do activism when you are ready again, so that then those people who have been working hard can take a rest. Just like any team sport, you keep kind of tapping and tapping out, switching and switching out, so that we can do this forever, because it's going to take us literally like all of the generations to just keep things not hateful and more loving. So I just want to thank everyone for all of those things that I know so many of us are doing, and just sending out love about that. Because yeah, things are very difficult right now, and still continue to be difficult. So yeah, I love everyone. Thank you so much for your attention. And we will see you, I guess, in 2 weeks. I'll see you in 2 weeks.